I look up to a lot of politicians. This is one that I have to literally look up to. I've never seen, I've not been around too many that fit that criteria. I'm here to introduce the 44th Attorney General of the state of Kansas, Derek Schmidt. Derek was born in Independence. He went to the University of Kansas for his bachelor's in journalism, Georgetown University for his law degree. While he was there, he interned for Senator Castlebaum and Senator Chuck Hagel. Came back to Independence to practice law, and then in 2000 ran for the Kansas Senate. He ran unopposed. In 2004 and 2008, just to give you a little history lesson, in 2004, Lana Olin, from 2000 to 2004, Lana Olin was the majority leader in the Kansas Senate. She then retired in 2004, and our own Roger Wrights began his distinguished career. Derek was then elected as majority leader. Quite an honor to be elected by your peers, and then served again, was re-elected in 2004 to serve as majority leader. Then in 2010, he ran for the Attorney General's race and won that race. In 2014, he is re-elected and is currently serving as his second term as Attorney General. The good news about that is that he's not jumping out of trunks. He's managed to live 6 years in the office without having a sexual scandal as previous Attorney Generals have had. So he's done a great job. The bar is low, but he's done a great job. The final comment I would make, and a historical comment, the real significance of him being here and the reason I hope you listen and evaluate his comments is that since I was born, all of the Kansas governors have been elected statewide, except for two bankers from our Kansas City named Donkey. We've had two attorney generals, we've had an insurance commissioner, a state treasurer, a secretary of state, a Senate president, two speakers of the House, and two former congressmen. If you look at that criteria today and apply it today, there are only three people who meet that criteria of having been elected statewide twice: Pat Roberts, Derek Schmidt, and Secretary of State Colbaugh. If you apply that to the next 2 years and the future of the state, it's important to hear what Attorney General Schmidt has to say today on a number of things. I present to you Attorney General Derek Schmidt.
Well, that was inspiring. Thank you. It makes me want to go jump out of a trunk. I think it's maybe not jump into a trunk. It's Joe was talking about the bar being set low, and I'll leave the characterization to others. But I know Clint's heard me say this. We've been there. We're in our 5th year now serving in this office. And when I started, I was the 5th person to hold the office of Kansas Attorney General in the prior 10 years, which, to put that in context, they're 4-year terms as a matter of constitutional law. And although we lawyers are not all that good at math, even I could figure out that meant something was amiss. And so we have tried our best not to needlessly jump out of trunks. I kid the guys around the office, only about half kidding, every day that we are not in the news. That is a good day at the office of the Attorney General. It means that we're just sort of doing our jobs and moving along. So I appreciate that very much, Joe, and thanks for having me back. I think it's been 5 years since last I visited your club. If my memory serves me correctly, it's back when Roger and I were serving together in the Senate, and I think he introduced me at that point. And it's good to see you again, Roger, wherever you're sitting. I just had a chance to say hi. I hadn't seen him in a while. So anyhow, thanks for having me back. Let me tell you a story, tell you the point of the story, and then do what I intend to do for a little bit of time. And then the game plan here is, if I get really wound up in a stem winder, to leave plenty of time to talk about whatever you'd like, whether it's questions or just a subject you'd like me to hit on. One of the nice things about the Office of Attorney General, but also one of the, awkward's the wrong word, but one of the characteristics that distinguishes it, unlike the policy branches, what I call them policy offices. If you're a governor or you're a legislator, you sort of have a theme and you run on it and you advocate it, and you wake up in the morning and hopefully listen to folks back home. You say, here's the priority today, I'm going to go. And we do that. I mean, I'm an elected official and I'm mindful of that, but we have this sort of second current that cuts against that sometimes, which is we are the state's lawyers. And a lot of times our priorities for the day or the week or the month get driven by what shows up in the inbox through no fault or credit of our own. State gets sued, we wind up defending him. Somebody commits a terrible crime, we wind up investigating and prosecuting him. You get the idea. And so the point is, it's a little bit harder to weave a consistent narrative in describing this office, at least I think if you describe it accurately. So against that backdrop, let me tell you a story. I was applying for this job back in 2010, which is a euphemistic way of saying I was running as a candidate. And it's an unusual job application process for those of you that have had your name on a ballot, whether it's local or statewide, whatever it is, in part because if you are the applicant, if you're the candidate, you don't know who the hiring committee is going to be until after the decision's already made. I mean, you don't know who's going to actually cast a ballot, show up on election day, be part of it. You know that historically it isn't going to be all 3 million of us in this state, or even all of us who are eligible, and so you're sort of budgeting your time and focus appropriately. So against that backdrop, I'm up in a county north and either east or west of here. I'm not going to tell you just where, because I discovered a long time ago, this is a very small state. And when I tell stories with actual names attached, somebody knows that person and they're related to them, and that's just never a good thing. So I was in a county up north of here, and I was out doing my job application with whoever I thought might possibly be part of the voting, the hiring committee. And I walked into a cafe, and there's a woman sitting there who's about my mother's age, I think, and she was sitting alone at a table. So I walked over and introduced myself, and she was very pleasant. She smiled and she said, "Sit down." So I sat down, and we chatted for a while. I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. It was quite a long conversation by the standards of the campaign trail. And she asked me a bunch of questions, and they were very innocuous. I thought appropriately probing. What's your name? Where are you from? What do? You have family? All those sorts of things. And then some that were a little more political in nature. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And we conversed and answered, and it was all done. And finally, I excused myself and shook her hand and thanked her and left. Didn't think anything else about it. So not too long later, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, I'm home in Independence, and I go to the mailbox, and there's a letter, handwritten envelope, addressed to me with this woman's name and address in the return corner. Oh, that's nice. So I open it up, and there's a handwritten letter in there from her to me. It says, "Dear Mr. Schmidt," and it was nice, but essentially she said, "I just wanted to let you know I really enjoyed our conversation, and I liked you, and I liked you so much I felt I owed it to you to write and tell you I'm not voting for you." And because I think we have too many lawyers in government already. Yeah. So, well, I read that. I thought, she might actually be on the hiring committee, so I need to rebut this. And so I violated the first rule, which is always sleep before you send that letter. And instead, I sat down and penned her what I thought was a very nice letter back. In hindsight, perhaps I should have slept on the tone just a bit. But I sent her back what I intended to be a very thoughtful letter, basically saying, "Dear ma'am, got your letter. Appreciate you taking the time to write. I enjoyed our visit too. And I just wanted to point out I am running for Attorney General, and so odds are good. Whoever wins this election, you're going to have a lawyer in government, and so I'd appreciate your help." And I never heard from her again, so I don't know exactly how that was received. Although I did win her county, so either she didn't have a lot of friends or she didn't talk a lot. I don't know which it was. Here's the point of that story. At the time, it was just sort of a nice little human encounter on the trail. In hindsight, I thought of that story a lot, because one of the underlying points, I think, which is absolutely true, is that most Kansans do not, and at least from my vantage point, should not wake up in the morning intently focused on what's happening at the Attorney General's office that day. In fact, if that's what people are waking up and worrying about, probably we need to alter how we're doing business, because it's probably not the sort of thing that ought to be on the top of everyone's mind every day. And to take that point even a step further, unless you are in a business or a profession or a life circumstance that causes you to interact with us, most folks probably don't have a strong sense of what it is the AG's office does day in and day out. And again, that's okay. So it's against that backdrop that I want to do what I'm going to do today, which is this. I worry a little bit, just personally, that sometimes I'll wake up and look at the headlines in a given day or a given week, and I'll think, who is that knucklehead in the AG's office, deciding they're going to focus on that again? My favorite is there's a newspaper in the state, not here in Manhattan, that took a photo of me at a political event over in Johnson County on an election night several years back. And I'm standing up, it was a happy night, and I'm standing up in front of this crowd and giving an appropriate, I hope, campaign talk, and they captured me at just this moment. I've got this, I caught a fish this big expression going with the goofiest grin on my face and my head cocked in a way. And now they use that picture absolutely every time there's anything newsworthy. So, you've got a headline, 3 people killed in a homicide, AG's office investigating, and here I am, looking at so it's a little distressing, but there's nothing I can do about it. And so, you focus on those things that you can affect, not those things you can't. But, sometimes you look at the things that become part of our public conversation, and you see that we're out there doing our job, which is defending our client, the state, when it gets sued, and the state decided to fund public schools one way, and we got a group of Kansans discontented with that, and so you got school finance, and now we become the face of school finance. You've got, the legislature decided, based on its representative role, that we ought to change our gun laws, and we're instructed to go out and interpret those laws and tell folks what they can and can't do, and so we do that, and we become the face of that issue. And the same is true with respect to the other social issues. Abortion, the legislature has decided to make some significant changes in law there. Folks discontented with it, we're the state's defense counsel, we defend them. And that's fine, not lamenting, I'm just describing, sometimes if you read the predominance of what's discussed, I too would wonder about the priorities of the office. So with that, let me share with you 10 things. I made a list this morning before I came over. 10 things that you may or may not know about your AG's office. That we are doing, that are priorities for us, and that they're not secret, but they perhaps are not at the top of the current narrative list. Item number 1. One of the things we did when we first got there, we looked at our consumer protection function at the AG's office. That's one of the core functions of the office, has been since the 1970s. By statute, we have a very important role in consumer protection. About 1 in 5 employees in our office I have dedicated to our consumer protection work, and that's because we are the principal consumer protection authority in the state. I mean, we share jurisdiction with every county and district attorney, but the reality is that most of that work defaults to us in most parts of the state because the county and district attorneys are up to their eyeballs doing all kinds of other stuff that we don't have a responsibility for, and so they're more than happy to have that sort of informal division. So we do a lot of consumer protection work on everything from marketing practices to telemarketing to sales practices, the lemon law, door-to-door sales, no call, you get the idea. Here's the point I want to make on this. When we got there, we looked at data 5 years ago, and I think that our services are underutilized. Given a state the size of Kansas, about 3 million people, given sort of what you'd expect in terms of scams and ripoffs, and I don't think enough people are asking us for our help. Why is that? Well, the good news is I didn't have to figure that out myself. I was able to turn to a colleague who's now out of office, but turn to a colleague in Arkansas, roughly same size state, and he'd asked the same question when he started serving. He, unlike us, hired a professional marketing firm to come in and figure out what's the answer. Why is it that Arkansas's consumer protection work is underutilized by Arkansans? And the answer they came up with was essentially, when you boil it all down, because this stuff is so legalistic that it becomes intimidating and people don't ask for help. I mean, if you're sitting there in your living room and you know you just got ripped off by a telemarketer and you're embarrassed about that because we're all proud people, you certainly are not going to be encouraged to ask for help if when you pull up the AG's website, it reads like a page out of the law books and you're afraid you're going to ask the wrong question to the wrong person, and then you're doubly embarrassed. And so people just didn't do it. It was a deterrent. What they did in Arkansas was essentially develop a marketing campaign. Get rid of all the legal stuff, come up with a slogan. Theirs was "Got Your Back, Arkansas." And all people have to remember is that if you got ripped off, the AG's office has got your back. Call them up, ask for help. If they can't help you, they'll hook you up with who can, as opposed to just telling you, sorry, you called the wrong agency. Customer service, I mean, a basic concept. They saw about a 50% increase in requests for assistance that went up and stayed there. Unlike Arkansas, we were able to shamelessly steal all of their work. I didn't have to pay for any of it because they let us with permission to use their market research. We did have enough pride. We didn't just say, "Got your back, Kansas." I mean, that would have been embarrassing. So instead, we're in your corner, Kansas. If you got ripped off in the state, the Attorney General's office is in your corner. We try to market it and brand it. In fact, Clint will leave you with a little magnet to take home and put on the fridge to remember that by. The website is, I think, plain English, at least as close as you can get. It doesn't require you to practice law in your living room and hit it online. Because of that simple change, we've seen about a 50% increase in the requests for assistance from Kansans. Just like Arkansas, the numbers went up and they stayed there. And that's a good thing, because that's the whole point, is we're there to try to help when that happens. So we're really proud of our In Your Corner Kansas initiative. Point number 2 that you may or may not have heard about. We've spent a lot of time on our watch engaged in conflict with our friends in the federal government, and that's absolutely true. We can talk about that later if you want. I talk about it from time to time. I mean, there are things the feds have done that I think are not just a bad idea, they're illegal, and we haven't been shy about filing suit when we think that's true. But I don't want to leave the impression that we don't work with our friends in the federal government when we think it's appropriate, and we do that a lot. One of the things we're doing that we hadn't gotten a lot of attention, we've been working with the Department of Health and Human Service Office of Inspector General, something we've jointly called Operation No Show, because one of the great joys in law enforcement work is being able to come up with the names of these operations. So, Operation No Show. It's a Medicaid fraud joint investigation effort, and it's particularly aimed at home health care services. We just finished, I think it's our 8th prosecution. We have 2 or 3 more pending, and I expect we'll announce another round of charges against another round of defendants later this year. And it's what the name implies. It's about folks who sign up to become providers of home health care services or other home support services to legitimate Medicaid beneficiaries. They bill the state and the feds for doing it, and they just don't show it. I mean, we're not talking about cases where it's a close call and, they just kind of fudge the numbers, or no, we're talking about folks that billed for services that were never provided, and it's clear that's what they intended. The classic case that I used to illustrate the point, we prosecuted, I believe it was a woman who did exactly what I just said, signed up to be paid, she was paid, she billed the state for providing home health care services for a Medicaid beneficiary. We were pretty sure that our evidence was good, that she never provided the services, because the beneficiary, during the entire window of time this woman had billed the state for serving her in her home, was in fact in prison. And so she wasn't home to get those home health care services. I mean, that's the kind of case we're talking about. And we've had a very good working relationship with the feds on that. I think it's the kind of thing Kansans expect us to be focused on our Medicaid fraud operation. Topic number 3, human trafficking. There's been a lot of talk about that. I don't want to talk about it in a macro sense, although we can later if you want. Let me give you a micro data point that we're especially proud of at the AG's office. The governor, as well as the legislature, have been very, very good, very, very responsive to suggestions and pleas to perhaps strengthen our state's approach to deal with trafficking victims. Here's a data point for you. In 2009, the grantee social service agencies of the Office of Attorney General, in other words, local providers of victim support services, crime victim support services, who receive grant funding through our office by law. That's the universe. Those grantees in 2009 reported serving a total of 2 human trafficking victims in the state of Kansas. 2 statewide. That's what they reported. In the fiscal year that just ended, that same universe reported serving more than 350. And I don't think there's been some dramatic change in an outburst of human trafficking in Kansas. I think that data point is evidence that this conversation we've been able to have without regard to where you serve, public sector, private sector, doesn't matter party or philosophy, that we're going to focus on this and make it a priority and help folks understand what they're seeing when they see it so we can have appropriate intervention and provide proper services, has made a difference. Because the folks on the ground providing services now know what it is they're seeing, and they're engaging the proper support for a unique group of crime victims. So I think that's a good thing. Fourth, let me just mention, one of the early things we did was ask the legislature to fund, even in a difficult budget time, the creation of a new child victims unit that would be housed at the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, one of our affiliate agencies. There is a lot of very, very good capacity in the law enforcement community around Kansas to deal with crimes against children, particularly sex crimes against children. But it is unevenly spread around the state. There are large parts of the state where, because of the absence of local resources, there simply is not the ability to maintain on a full-time basis the sort of specially trained, dedicated investigators who do investigation of particularly sex crimes against kids. And they're tough crimes to investigate. I mean, it's rare there's physical evidence. Contrary to what you might think, it is rare there is physical evidence. Normally these cases turn on the testimony of a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old child. There is no third-party witness. The perpetrator is almost always, data says about 90% of the time, somebody that the child knew and trusted. And so you're asking that little kid to sit in front of a jury of strangers and an intimidating judge in a courtroom setting, tell the truth about what happened to them, when the person that they're accusing, I don't even pick on you, but the person they're accusing is somebody they knew and trusted all along, and that's the only evidence you have. I mean, that is a very difficult case to work up properly and prepare for prosecution. And we just didn't have uniformly the specialized capacity to develop those cases. The legislature said yes, they gave us the authority, they gave us the money, and the KBI now has a dedicated child victims unit that frankly works predominantly in underserved areas of the state where there is not local capacity, at the Riley County PD, for example, which has good capacity. You get the idea. So I think that's a good contribution to the overall public safety system of the state. Fifth point, along those same lines, when we got here and started, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation had a grand total of 1 digital forensic analyst. I mean, how many of us avoid using anything digital in our lives day to day? Almost none. I mean, everything you do now has a digital footprint, and that's true for the bad guys as well, and it's true for crimes as well. It's not just computer crime anymore. Almost every crime has some type of digital evidence involved in it. We had 1 person doing the analysis. Wholly insufficient. We worked with the feds, created the first of its kind in the country, Transitional Regional Forensic Laboratory. It's based in Topeka at the KBI headquarters. It's a branch of the FBI laboratory out of Kansas City. It will transfer totally to KBI control at the end of, I think it's 3 years, I forget the timeline. And the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We're now up to 10 bodies doing that work. Still wholly inadequate, but a whole lot better than the 1 that we started with just a handful of years ago. Similarly, point number 6, if you've been in Topeka lately, drive by the east side of the Washburn campus. We will have in November, God willing, the grand opening for the new KBI Forensic Laboratory, first time in the history of the state of Kansas. First time in the history of the state of Kansas. We will have built a crime lab from the ground up for the purpose of being a crime lab. Now, every other time, we've taken an old building and remodeled it. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea inherently, but I'm saying if you want a 21st century laboratory that can attract and retain 21st century talent in a very competitive national marketplace where we are already paying well below market rates, you got to at least give them an adequate facility to come apply their trade in. And so I was really delighted the legislature and the governor said yes to that, and that is that's going to be very good long term for public safety in the state. 7th item, we asked the legislature to overhaul our open government laws. They did, and I won't dwell on it, but to say we will be, as required by law now, ramping up our investigation of alleged CORA and COMA violations over the next handful of years. It's going to be awkward, truth be known, it's going to be awkward. And we're mindful of that, but it's the law, and they wanted more uniform enforcement, and we're going to try to give them that. 8th, we have overhauled the state's criminal appeals process. This is an inside baseball deal unless you're a criminal prosecutor, so I'm not going to mention it, but let me just, I'm not going to dwell on it, but let me just say it this way. You know, in the digital world, and I'm no tech guy, but if I understand the world correctly, if you don't have enough computing power in the back room, it doesn't matter how pretty your stuff is in the front office, it's not going to work the way it's supposed to. And criminal appellate capacity is the computing power in the back room. And we just didn't have it at the level we need it in a state the size of Kansas. We now have a much more robust capacity. We have 3 cases, criminal cases from the state pending in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to argue in October. We have 3 more we're asking the Supreme Court to hear, including one from Riley County, and they'll tell us whether or not they agree to. We would not have been able to handle 6 SCOTUS cases at a time just a few years ago. So we increased the back shop computing capacity. Point number 9, we now have regional prosecutors from the AG's office posted in Goodland and Pittsburgh. That's not a big deal where we're standing right now, but that's a really big deal in parts of the state that are just lightly served in terms of legal capacity. I know it seems counterintuitive, but there are big parts of the state, it's just hard to get somebody to serve as county attorney because it's not the coveted job and there aren't a lot of lawyers to draw from, and the ones that are there have been there a long time and don't want to do it again. I mean, that's just a reality. It's a demographic reality, and we're trying to step into the breach in those geographical areas and say we're here to help with at least the big cases where those sorts of gaps exist. And finally, point number 10, back in 1998, Attorney General Stovall entered Kansas into the National Tobacco Settlement. In that, Kansas undertook a lot of obligations to do a lot of stuff that's not that interesting unless you're really interested in the subject, so I won't dwell on it. But it's an ongoing obligation in terms of enforcement. And there were serious allegations that Kansas, like a lot of other states, we weren't alone, just didn't do well enough on that front in the early part of this century, from around 2000 until, let's say, 2006, 2007. The allegation from the tobacco companies was Kansas didn't live up to its end of the bargain. They ultimately brought a vigorous arbitration action against us, and here's the bottom line. They wanted us to pay back the money. They wanted us to pay back the money to the tune of maybe $50 to $60 million a year that had come to the state over about a decade. The reason I'm telling you this is every year our office is responsible for preparing the state's list of contingent liability from litigation. In other words, when they do all the bond stuff that I don't understand, one of the things that the smart folks that do that kind of stuff have to know is what kind of risk is there out there that the state's going to lose a lawsuit and have to pay a lot of money. That's what they ask us. We have to report the big cases. So we always report stuff like the school finance case. State could lose that. It's $1.5 billion case at the high water mark. That's obviously relevant for financial purposes and planning. The number two, behind school finance, the number two largest contingent liability when I got there was this tobacco case. Because the risk of having to repay potentially hundreds of millions of dollars was real. And we, like, it wasn't just us, group of states worked together, but we were able to extinguish that liability for a 10-year period. It is now zero. We're now not reporting it. And now we're in a position, we've made all the past problems go away. We want to make sure we don't get back in that hole. So we've tried to beef up our tobacco enforcement going forward. So anyway, that's 10 things that, you know, they aren't coffee shop talk, but we're proud of at the AG's office. I'll stop talking, and I've probably gone overtime. Be glad to, whatever time we got, I'm not sure what the clock is, talk about what you want, or I'll sit down. And thank you all very, very much for letting me come back. Hello.
Derek, hear and read a lot about cyber terrorism. Is that a AG responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, you know, our jurisdictional boundaries, of course, are the state of Kansas, and we're not magic. We have trouble dealing with matters that are physically outside, and there aren't a lot of, you know, cyber terrorists sitting in Kansas attacking Kansas. Most of that stuff comes from offshore. So that's a case where we are involved because we're kind of a link between a lot of the local law enforcement and the federal authorities, and we spend a lot of time keeping that connection going. At the end of the day, it is predominantly federal that we wind up involved with. But you know, Kansas has a tool that predates me. It's still going. It's called the Intelligent Fusion Center, where we're able to work with appropriate safeguards in place. You sort of get a military perspective on certain items. You get a civilian law enforcement perspective. You get a private sector perspective. And it allows us to fuse different points of view and different sources of intelligence. And cyber attacks are very much on the minds of folks working that. It's very real. Yes, sir?
Water issues resolved with Nebraska and Colorado?
Yeah, water issues resolved with Nebraska and Colorado. From the AG's office standpoint, the answer is yes, because that litigation with both states has ended. The Colorado case is gone for now. The Nebraska case is gone for now after the U.S. Supreme Court's decision within the last year. Obviously, there are always ongoing issues, but it's now principally an issue for our Department of Agriculture and our state water agencies with their counterparts in the other states to work out, and hopefully it doesn't again flare up to the point we wind up litigating it. So, yeah.
Derek, I keep getting this call from Rachel from Card Member Services.
She doesn't work for us. Yeah.
Is there some way I can put her in touch with you?
Yeah, please, have her give us a ring, give her a name. Yeah. Yeah, I wish we could shut Rachel down. The feds, this is maybe it's a little known, the feds actually prosecuted Rachel a while back. And you'll be shocked to learn that another Rachel popped up. I don't know how that happened, but it, yeah, we do a lot of no-call enforcement, and we love to go after them, and we bring a lot of cases, but at the end of the day, we're not magic. And if we can't find the folks on the other end of the line, we're not magic. So. But complain, we're happy to get the complaint. Sometimes it is helpful. Yes, ma'am?
Will the new KBI institution speed things up because, you know, we're waiting months for DNA, and also they just announced that they would be exploring more rape kits. There's $40 million coming to the feds. Are we a state that will
Right.
some of that?
Yeah, two questions on forensic evidence analysis. The first question is big picture, will the new laboratory speed up the processing of evidence? And the answer is, I certainly hope so. That's the purpose and the intent. I mean, sometimes I kind of cut to the shortcut on that because I'm down in the weeds and I know it. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. It's not a KBI problem or an AG problem or a facilities problem. The problem is that in the modern world, we're going to see more, not less, reliance in more, not fewer, local law enforcement investigations on forensic evidence, whether it's digital, whether it's blood, whether it's DNA, whether it's firearms, whatever. And the demand for that that's generated by every law enforcement agency in the state just simply grossly outstripped the capacity of the KBI, which is, for most agencies, the processing entity to process. And we looked at that and said, we can't put a Band-Aid on it. If we want to fix that turnaround time issue so that the local police can do their jobs timely, we have to fix the laboratory issue. And that's why we're dealing with this. Put it in perspective, the average turnaround time for a firearms sample that was sent to the KBI for analysis, a bullet or a gun on the rifle, whatever. 5 years ago, the average turnaround time, 48 months. Average. 48 months. Wholly unacceptable. Far better than that now. Last I checked, I think we were down to, again, on average about 19. And averages are a little deceptive in this case because all of this evidence is driven by court calendars. And so, you know, if you're in the queue just quietly waiting and there's a court date set over here, somebody's going to jump the queue. So it kind of fouls up the analysis, but at least it gives you a concept. Average turnaround time for DNA, 19 months when I got there. 19 months. And, you know, those are almost always serious crimes. So that's the problem we're trying to fix. And building alone doesn't do it. We'll need bodies to put in it next, but that's the next conversation. On the question about testing of rape kits, Kansas, we are in the process, the Bureau is in the process of working with local law enforcement agencies to figure out what the nature of the problem is here. We don't have the answer on that yet. The preliminary results suggest it's uneven around the state. We're a local control state. There are some jurisdictions that have more untested than others, and we're trying to help them figure out why that is and can we help get them processed if that's the objective. You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.